No matter where we live, in the city or the country, we must be ready all the time for the atomic bomb. Duck and cover. That's the first thing to do. Duck and cover. The next important thing to do after that is to stay covered until the danger is over. Yes, we must all get ready now, so we know how to save ourselves if the atomic bomb ever explodes near us.
Remember what to do, friends. Now tell me right out loud. What are you supposed to do when you see the flash? Duck and cover. Duck and cover. Duck.
You're in the middle. Between the two. The real and shadow. Right now you're in a kind of a limbo. You're neither here nor there.
Where are we?
Between light and shadow.
Is this the day? Is this the beginning of the end? There is no time to wonder, no time to ask, why is it happening? Why is it finally happening? There is time only for fear, for the piercing pain of panic. Do we pray? Or do we merely run now and pray later? Will there be a later? Or is this the day?
Okay, before anybody emails me, I'm fully aware that that clip is actually from an Outer Limits, not a Twilight Zone. I used it intentionally because it's relevant to, well, wait and see. Hey guys, it's Craig, and this is Between Light and Shadow, a mostly Twilight Zone podcast. This week, we're tackling one of the show's best-known episodes, one that you'll consistently find in critics' top 10 lists, a true icon that still shines in the pop culture zeitgeist almost 60 years after it first aired. People who aren't even that familiar with the Twilight Zone still recognize this episode. It's the kind of episode that gets parodied on The Simpsons and a lot of other shows too, ensuring that it will live on long after we're all dead and buried. It's one of the few Twilight Zones that seems to transcend time and space and generations. A gremlin on the wing, a devilish fortune teller / napkin holder / bobblehead, a surgical team with pig-like faces, an alien cookbook, a cute but murderous talking doll, and a meek bank clerk who just wants to be left alone to read in peace, and the atom bomb that might just make it all happen for him. That last one is the focus of our studies this week. Time Enough at Last was written by Rod Serling, adapted from a short story by Marilyn Venable, writing as Lynn Venable because at the time she had a better shot at being published if people thought she was a he. Yeah, I know. It's awful. Anyway, her short story first appeared in a 1953 issue of If, Worlds of Science Fiction. I'm not presenting a dramatic reading of this one, since Tom Elliot already did it on the Twilight Zone podcast, and we have a bit of a rule around here. If Tom already did it, we don't touch it. So maybe pause this, go over to his podcast and listen to his reading. It's his 10th episode from way back in 2011. I'll put a link in the show notes. So go do that and then come back. I'll wait. interesting item about Marilyn Venable. She got her start by selling science fiction stories for $20 a pop through her literary agent, the Forrest J. Ackerman. Rod Serling paid her $500 for Time Enough at Last. Now, I've never been paid for anything I've written, unless you count that giant chocolate chip cookie I won in the creative writing contest in the 6th grade. So $500 seems like a lot to me, and that's in 2017 dollars. In 1959 money, that's a pretty big chunk of change. Time Enough at Last first aired on November 20th, 1959, and was directed by John Brom, who won a Directors Guild Award for his work here. Or maybe he didn't. I don't know. Accounts seem to differ. In his rather exhaustive book, The Twilight Zone, Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic, Martin Grams Jr. sets the record straight once and for goddamned all. This was the only episode of the series to earn a Directors Guild Award nomination. Regardless of what appears in numerous reference guides, John Brom did not win the award. He lost to Phil Carlson for The Untouchables. Schooled again. I mean, don't get me wrong. If erroneous info is out there, it should be corrected. But I don't know. I always detect a bit of an underlying tone when Grams does it. Anyway, John Brom directed a total of 12 Twilight Zones, more than any other director. He also directed 2 Outer Limits episodes, The Bellerose Shield and Zzz. No, really, that's the title. Zzz, like 5 Z's. Zzz. It's about a bee girl, so... This is the 3rd time we've encountered John Brom on the podcast. He also directed The Four of Us Are Dying and Shadowplay, 2 of my all-time favorites. So how does Time Enough at Last stack up against those terrific titans of Twilight Zone transcendence? Let's find out. We're in a bank. A woman is at a teller window, because ATMs didn't exist yet. She just wants to withdraw $10, but the teller is making it a bit of an ordeal. His name is Henry Bemis.
Mrs. Chester, have you ever read David Copperfield?
How's that?
It's a wonderful book. This poor little fellow, his father has passed away, and his mother has married this miserable man called Murdstone. Isn't that a villainous name? Murdstone. Well, this Murdstone has a sister called Jane.
Mr. Bemis, you've shortchanged me again. You owe me $1 more. See? There's only 24 here, and there should be 25.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry, Mrs. Chester. I thought there were 5 ones. There's only...
Oh, snap. Bit of a burn there. She's certainly got the faint whiff of bitchiness about her, but honestly, who's really the bad guy here? We'll come back to that. Now, that's, of course, Burgess Meredith in the role of Henry Bemis. He of Batman fame.
Tennyson Penguin to the rescue!
Of Rocky fame.
So why are you doing this? Because you can't win, Rock. This guy'll kill you to death inside of 3 rounds.
You're crazy.
What else is new?
He's just another fighter.
No, he ain't just another fighter. This guy is a wrecking machine, and he's hungry. Hell, you ain't been hungry since you won that belt.
Of Puff the Magic Dragon fame. Wait, what?
To be truly better, you must make a journey with me. Come along now.
But where are we going?
That's a good question, Jackie. We're going to Honolulu.
What's Honolulu?
My kingdom by the sea. Well, it's not exactly a kingdom. It's a kingdom. A few acres and independence. But it is rather magical. Let me show you.
and of course, Twilight Zone fame. In fact, he and Jack Klugman are tied for the most starring roles by a single actor. Each did 4 throughout the series' 5 years on the air. Now, Meredith probably beats Klugman because of his continued association with the show after it went off the air. He also did 1 episode of The Loner, Rod Serling's post-Twilight Zone series, 2 episodes of Night Gallery, Rod Serling's post-Twilight Zone series, plus he narrated Twilight Zone the movie in 1983.
You unlock this door with a key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of sound. A dimension of sight. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You just crossed over into the Twilight Zone.
I should also note that Time Enough at Last is actually referenced in the prologue to the Twilight Zone movie.
Did you ever watch the Twilight Zone? Oh, God. Remember the Twilight Zone with Burgess Meredith? Remember, he loved to read, and there was a nuclear war, and he had no friends anyway, and he was down in the basement of the library. Yes, he was the last man. He broke his glasses. Yeah. This thing freaked me out. When I was 7 years old, I bought another pair of glasses just in case that would happen.
Oh, those shows. They were so good. They were so scary. Yeah.
Ah, shit. Spoiler alert. We'll see Burgess Meredith again in Mr. Dingle the Strong and the Obsolete Man, both in Season 2, and then Printer's Devil in Season 4. Okay, so Henry puts out his "Next Teller, Please" sign and goes back to his book. And wouldn't you know it, his boss sneaks up behind him and he's busted.
I wonder if I might see you in my office, Mr. Bemis.
Why, certainly, Mr. Carswell. I don't suppose you've ever read David Copperfield, have you?
No, Mr. Bemis, I have not. Now, if you'll be good enough to accompany me.
Now, that's Vaughn Taylor playing Mr. Carsville. He co-starred in 5 Twilight Zone episodes, but since he always played a supporting character and never the lead, Meredith and Klugman still have him beat.
Now, Mr. Bemis, I shall come to the point of this interview. I shall arrive via the following route, which is namely, what constitutes an efficient member of this organization. Viz., a bank teller who knows his job and performs it. I.e., an organization man who functions within an organization. You, Mr. Bemis, do not function within the organization. You are neither an efficient bank teller nor a proficient employee. You, Mr. Bemis, are a reader.
A reader?
A reader.
Yes.
A reader of books, magazines, periodicals, newspapers. I see you constantly going downstairs into the vault during your lunch hour. Ultimatum, Mr. Bemis.
Yes, sir.
You will henceforth devote your time to your job and forget reading, or you'll find yourself outdoors on a park bench reading from morning till night for want of having a job. Do I make myself perfectly clear?
Oh, that's perfectly clear, sir. It's just that,
Just that what, Bemis? Make it quick and get back to your cage.
Now, that's kinda mean. True, but mean. If you have an employee who isn't performing at a satisfactory level, that's a coaching opportunity for their boss, right? Maybe Henry just needs some leadership, some gentle guidance to blossom into something approximating his full potential. But this was 1959, so things like human resources and hostile work environment weren't really a thing. That evening, we meet Henry's delightful wife, Helen. He's in the living room, reading a newspaper, which she quite aggressively snatches out of his hands.
You want more coffee or don't you?
No, thank you, dear.
Well, then why don't you tell me that? And don't sneak off into the living room to bury yourself in newsprint. I think we've been over this quite enough, Henry. I won't tolerate a husband of mine sacrificing the art of conversation. We're playing cards tonight. I want you to change your shirt. We're going over to the Phillips house.
Oh, dear.
All right, Henry. Anything to say?
No, dear, nothing to say.
So Henry's got a book of poetry hidden under the couch cushion, which he digs out as soon as Helen leaves the room. And of course, She comes back and catches him with it.
A book of modern poetry. Yours, Henry? Would you like to read me some?
We'll read you some. Do you mean read you out loud out of the book?
Do you want to?
Oh, I would love to. No, there are some lovely things in here. And there are one or two things from T.S. Elliot and Edmondson, Vincent Millay, Robert Frost, Carl Sandburg.
So Henry opens the book and flips through it. Each page has been methodically and thoroughly defaced with a Sharpie, or whatever the 1959 equivalent of a Sharpie was.
Who did this, Helen?
Who do you think did it, Henry? You should thank me, really. A grown man who reads silly, ridiculous, nonsensical doggerel.
This isn't doggerel. There's some very beautiful things here.
I say it's doggerel. I also say it's a waste of time.
Helen, don't do that for her. Helen, please don't do that. Why, Helen? Why do you do these things?
Because I'm married to a fool.
What the Listeners of the podcast know that upon occasion, we subject Twilight Zone characters to something we call the dick test. It's not complicated. If they demonstrate dickish tendencies, we make note of it as follows.
You dick!
Now, we've not yet evolved as a species to the point where gender fluidity is universal, so we generally use dick in reference to men. We haven't yet come up against a female character with profoundly dickish tendencies, so we haven't had a need for a female version of the dick test. Actually, that's not true. Nora in A World of Difference was just as bad, if not worse, than Helen Bemis. But we didn't memorialize it with a jingle.
Look, I don't care if they bounce you. I don't care if you never work again the rest of your miserable life. But you're going to pay me what the judge tells you to pay me, or so help me, I'll put you so far behind bars they'll never find you again.
What can I say? We dropped the ball. So this one's for both Nora and Helen.
You just a B-I-I-T-C-H. You just a B-I-I-T-C-H.
Well, I'd love to stay and chat, but you're a total bitch.
Bye, Felicia.
Wow, suddenly the dick clip seems so basic. Might need to gussy that one up a bit. Anyway, the next day, Henry ventures down into the bank vault for lunch. It's the only place he can get away from everyone and read in peace. He pulls out a newspaper, and emblazoned across the front page is a scary headline, H-bomb capable of total destruction. His pocket watch, which is sitting on the floor next to him, suddenly flips open, seemingly of its own accord, and its glass face cracks. And then all hell breaks loose. Henry comes to after the shockwave has subsided, still inside the bank vault. He crawls up through the ruins of the bank and discovers that the entire city has been destroyed. As he wanders through the rubble, Serling steps in to give us another one of those rare mid-episode narrations.
Seconds, minutes, hours. They crawl by on hands and knees for Mr. Henry Bemis, who looks for a spark in the ashes of a dead world. A telephone connected to nothingness. A neighborhood bar, a movie, a baseball diamond, a hardware store. The mailbox of what was once his house and is now a rubble. They lie at his feet as battered monuments to what was but is no more.
Helen! Helen! Where are you?
Mr. Henry Bemis on an 8-hour tour of a graveyard.
And this, dear listeners, leads us into...
Shame.
Oh, no.
Shame. Shame.
Wrong, it's a mistake.
Dumbass.
When we were covering I Shot an Arrow into the Air a few weeks back, I indicated that only 3 Twilight Zone episodes featured mid-episode commentary from Serling: Walking Distance, I Sing the Body Electric, and I Shot an Arrow into the Air. eagle-eared listener Roger Scarlett kindly pointed out that I forgot about Time Enough at Last. He went on to point out another error from later in that same podcast episode when we were covering the Rip Van Winkle caper. I said that Robbie the Robot only appeared in 2 Twilight Zones, Uncle Simon and the Brain Center at Whipple's. Roger reminded me that a toy Robbie the Robot appears in One for the Angels, which I should have known since I pointed it out when we covered that one. The very first shot of the episode is a close-up of a Robbie the Robot wind-up toy. So anyway, thanks, Roger. And kids, if you ever hear me screw up, I want to hear about it. Okay, back to business. Henry finally comes to a conclusion as he wanders around the apocalyptic landscape that mere hours ago was a living, thriving metropolis.
They're all dead. They must be. Everybody's dead except me. I'm all right. Why am I all right? I was right there in the middle of the vault. I was down in the vault. That's why I'm alive. I was down in the... The thing of it is, though, the thing of it is, I'm not at all sure that I want to be alive.
Henry sets up some temporary lodging in the ruins of a grocery store, where there's food aplenty, then stretches out on a banged-up couch.
Let's see. The very worst part is being alone. Is this how it's going to be? Just sitting around day after day, eating, smoking a cigarette, reading the same half of a newspaper over and over again.
The next morning, the fact that he's facing solitude for the rest of his days really starts to sink in.
Is someone there? Someone! It's quite all right. This is solitude. I've never had much solitude. I have enough to occupy my mind and my time. I have enough food, and I'm really very fortunate. Yes, I'm really extremely fortunate. Help! 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 Someone, please! Someone, please! Please, someone! Someone, please!
He comes upon a sporting goods store, specifically a shattered display case full of pistols. He picks one up and holds it up to his head.
Well, I'm sure I'll be forgiven for this, the way things are. I know I'll be forgiven.
Something stops him just before he pulls the trigger. It's the city library, where they have thousands and thousands of books. Those giant steps leading up to the library were built for the 1960 MGM film The Time Machine, which starred that Aussie rascal Rod Taylor, who made Vanishing Without a Trace almost sexy in And When the Sky Was Opened.
It's like way out.
Those steps also show up in A Nice Place to Visit later in season 1, which we'll cover, I don't know, later. Anyway, so Henry stumbles up the library stairs like a kid on Christmas. In short order, he's picked out stacks and stacks of books to fill his future days, months, years.
And the best thing, the very best thing of all, is there's time now. There's all the time I need and all the time I want. Time. there's time enough at last.
He leans over to pick up a book, loses his balance a bit, and then, you know what's coming.
He was the last man he broke his glasses.
That's not fair. That's not fair at all. There was time now. There was all the time I needed. That's not fair. That's not fair.
Life's not fair. It's never fair. Life's not fair. It's never fair. Life's not fair. It's never fair. Life's not fair.
Much has been written about Ray Bradbury's influence on Rod Serling, so it's interesting to note that Time Enough at Last could be seen as a prequel of sorts to Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. Henry Bemis is surrounded by anti-literature types. Now, if you were to expand that disdain of reading to a large portion of the population, you could see how society could eventually move towards something as extreme as book burning. You can kind of imagine it starting now, actually. How many of us are reading less books in favor of gazing passively at our smart devices? Now, if it's your Kindle, then you're still reading books, so you aren't really part of the problem. I'm talking about Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We can even watch TV shows and movies on our phones now. I remember a time when people read on the subway or on their lunch hours, a book, the newspaper. And I'm not criticizing or pointing fingers. I'm very much guilty of this myself.
Time enough at last.
Time enough at last? Henry's problem isn't that he doesn't have time to read. The real problem is, as Serling observes in his opening narration, he is conspired against by the people in his life who actually actively prevent him from reading. They're the real problem. So his delight at having unlimited time after surviving the nuclear holocaust and his subsequent mourning of the loss of said time after his glasses break doesn't really jibe with what's come before. This also renders the episode's title somewhat anachronistic as well. What he should really be happy about is that there's nobody around to fuck with him anymore. And about those unfortunate glasses, I think some sort of foreshadowing earlier in the story would make it feel less arbitrary and more effective, maybe even appropriate. Maybe Helen could order him to have his glasses adjusted because they keep slipping down his nose, and it would be a ridiculous waste of money to replace them should they get broken. Later, he could observe that, since his specs survived the bomb with no damage, they clearly didn't need adjusting after all. It would place the blame for his ultimate plight squarely on himself, rather than a random, heartless universe. Unless you want to count the pocket watch cracking when the shockwave hits, but that's really subtle. My overall view of Time Enough at Last has mutated to and fro over the years. When I first discovered the Twilight Zone, I couldn't get enough of it, and I loved every single episode I saw. I was young, in love, indiscriminate. Now, as I got older and began to look at the series a bit more carefully and critically, I grew less warm towards certain episodes. When I covered Time Enough at Last in my blog in 2009, I'd say that young, infatuate love had turned stone cold. I can't deny this episode's iconic status. Among the 156 episodes that make up the Twilight Zone, it's among the best remembered, the most beloved. I've remembered it well enough over the years, but I can't bring myself to love it. I have some, shall we say, issues with it. First, the positives. It's well directed by John Brom, who would go on to direct a total of 12 episodes, more than any other director. It's well shot by George T. Clemens. The sets are undeniably impressive. The smoldering cityscape wreckage, the library ruins. It's certainly a visual treat and provides many, frankly, unforgettable images. So what's my problem? First, the characters. I don't give a damn about any of them. Now, we're supposed to sympathize with the Burgess Meredith character, but for the life of me, I can't figure out why. Here's a guy who is so obsessive about reading that he's blind to everything else around him. He hides a copy of David Copperfield on his lap and reads from it while counting out money to a customer, he's a bank teller, shortchanges her, then drones on about his book without noticing that she's walked away. Christ, man, snap out of it and do your job. It's hard to get too upset with his boss for chewing him out. I'd be chewing him out too. And okay, we can all agree that the wife is an uber bitch, so maybe on that front it's impossible not to sympathize with him a bit, but hell, he married her, didn't he? If he's not going to stand up to her, then he gets what he gets. Meredith's performance doesn't help matters either. I'm usually a fan of his work, but this particular performance bugs me, though not as much as his work in Season 2's Mr. Dingle the Strong, an episode which I liken to a barbed wire root canal does. He doesn't draw me in. Quite the opposite. He repels me. And it's not just those Coke bottle glasses either. He's annoying, self-absorbed, and idiosyncratic to a fault, as if he's suffering from some mild form of Asperger's syndrome. Now, a couple of logic problems plague the episode. First, our unfortunate hero finds a pistol in a shattered display case from a sporting goods store. And yeah, it's fucking loaded. Now, I'm pretty sure that even in 1959, the guns didn't come preloaded. Second, and much more significant, our hero wanders around for 2 days in the radioactive ruins of his bomb-blasted city, unaffected. Surely he'd suffer from massive radiation poisoning, but he trots merrily along, seemingly unaffected. It seems the hydrogen bomb in this particular alternate universe merely scorches things and knocks buildings over. After all that, as if all that wasn't enough, my single biggest problem with the episode is the cruelty with which the protagonist is ultimately dispatched. He discovers the ruins of the local library, gathers up enough books to last him for years, and then his glasses get broken. The tragedy isn't limited to the loss of a lifetime of literary joy. We've already seen how bad his eyesight is without them, thanks to a clever POV shot earlier. He's not going to make it off those library steps without falling and cracking his skull, and even if he does, he'll never find his way back to the food supply he squirreled away. The breaking of his glasses is quite literally a death sentence. And for what? Some vague commentary on the evils of nuclear arms? Jesus, give the guy radiation poisoning if that's your angle. No, this is something else altogether. It constitutes a writer's contempt for his or her protagonist on a quantum level. As annoying as I find him, he doesn't deserve this fate. If it's intended to be some sort of tragedy, well, good tragedy has a point. This doesn't. So I guess I do sympathize with him after all, not because of the other characters or the horrendous fate that befalls him. I sympathize with him because his creator, the writer, clearly hates him and seeks to torment him from start to finish. And it's not Rod Serling's fault either. He didn't come up with this. He merely adapted an existing short story. Lynn A. Venable, the original writer, is the one to blame. My God, what a toxic, pointless exercise. One final note. I'm apparently not the only one to react this way to the episode. As recounted in The Twilight Zone, Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic by Martin Grams Jr., Serling responded to an offended viewer's letter with the following. We were attempting irony, and in the view of many of the audience, we created only sadism. What's funny is early on in the blog, I hardly wrote anything about the episodes. It was really just a way for me to keep track of each episode as it turned 50, and maybe just throw a couple thoughts and photos out there. Evidently, I felt compelled to basically go off long form on this particular episode. But anyway, that was 2009. The real question here is, do I still feel that way? In some ways, yes. Henry is still annoying in the extreme. In my blog, I compared him to someone with Asperger's syndrome. Now, I know that wasn't the intent, but I could certainly cut him a lot of slack if he did suffer from something on the autism spectrum. I don't know if Burgess Meredith chose to play Henry this way, or if he was directed to do so by John Brom, perhaps a bit of both, but man, he's a lot. I don't know if all his idiosyncrasies are supposed to somehow endear him to the viewer, and I don't know, maybe it does, just not me personally. I still find him fairly repellent, maybe not as much. Maybe as I get older and my eyesight gets worse, I'm able to sympathize a bit more with him. But Helen?
You just a B-I-T-C-H. You just a B-I-T-C-H.
Nah, still horrible after all these years. It still bothers me to this day that Serling considers Bemis a charter member in the fraternity of dreamers, which implies that he is somehow deserving of a special level of understanding and patience. Because he likes to read? If anything, I'd say his compulsion to read 24/7 at the expense of his obligations and responsibilities makes him deserving of a smack upside the head. Now, stay with me here. Let's say you stop in at your local bank for what should be a quick in and out transaction. The ATM is down, so you've got to withdraw your cash at the teller window old school style. The teller is distractedly scrolling through his Facebook feed or taking selfies instead of giving you his undivided attention. As a result, he shortchanges you. Now, are you going to think to yourself, now there's a real dreamer against whom society has conspired to deny the simple joy of Facebooking on the clock, someone deserving of my sympathy and respect? Yeah, I didn't think so.
You, Mr. Bemis, do not function within the organization. You are neither an efficient bank teller nor a proficient employee.
Mr. Carsville probably should have canned Bemis's ass long ago. And speaking of Mr. Carsville, did you notice the door to his office doesn't have his name on it? The nameplate just says President in big white block letters. The bank tellers have their names prominently displayed at their windows, even that no-account Henry Bemis, but the president doesn't get his name on the door? I'd be like, yeah, I'm going to need my name on that. Well, I don't know, maybe he just got promoted and they haven't had a chance to update the door yet. I do still greatly respect the amount of work that went into the episode on a technical level. The scale, or illusion of scale, is still impressive after almost 6 decades. I don't know how much of the post-nuclear landscape was even really visible on the TVs of the time, but blown up in HD on my 60-inch plasma, it's spectacular. There's so much detail. They probably didn't need to go to the lengths that they did to convey the destruction, but I certainly appreciate that they did. The unique visual identity of the Twilight Zone is largely composed of faces, human and otherwise. It's not often that a location is so memorable, so instantly recognizable, but the bombed-out ruins of Henry City is supremely unforgettable. I'll bet you're thinking to yourself, gee, I'd really like some sort of collectible merchandise to commemorate this iconic episode. I'll just bet you are.
Hey, kid, you want a toy?
Looks like a really rich 4th grader lives here.
You can collect them all, each sold separately.
Wrapped in plastic.
I am a collector.
They're action figures, not dolls.
Biff Bang Pow started releasing various collectibles based on Twilight Zone characters in 2009, and they merchandised the hell out of Henry Bemis in the process. Let's see, they did a bobblehead, an 8-inch action figure, a 3 3/4-inch monochrome action figure, a 3 3/4-inch color action figure, a weird storage box thing that looks like a stack of books and comes with a fake pair of Coke bottle glasses, still available for the obscene price of $99.99, and I guess that's it. I would have sworn there was also an episode-themed journal notebook, like the To Serve Man cookbook / notebook they did, but I can't find any proof that it ever existed, so I must have hallucinated it. I do have the 8-inch figure and the bobblehead languishing in a box in my garage. Biff Bang Pow also did a limited number of dioramas, miniature displays depicting specific scenes. I think they only did like 3 of them, but they should have done one of the final tableau, the library ruins, with a little Henry Bemis standing there blind as a bat. I don't think it'll ever happen now. I think Biff Bang Pow is pretty much done releasing Twilight Zone stuff. Now, Time Enough at Last may be the single most parodied episode of the entire 5-year run of the Twilight Zone. Now, of course, we all know about the Drew Carey Show bit.
Can't believe I'm the only man left alive. Well, at least I have all my Playboys. And all the time in the world. Let's see, where did I leave off? Oh, July 1999. Girls of Hawaiian Tropic.
And the Modern Family bit when Jay's Kindle gets broken.
Check it out, Grandpa. Jam means working. I'm not dizzy.
Yeah. Oh, watch the drink, kid. Oh, my limbs.
I'm sorry, Grandpa.
All right, relax. We might be okay here. It's not fair. It's not fair.
And the Simpsons bit.
Mom, you didn't get the milk. And you parked on top of the mailman.
It's okay, all part of the job. Can you believe I get paid to wear short pants?
Sorry, I can't go outside. I'll call for help.
No, hurry. I got plenty to read. Woo, Twilight Zone magazine. Oh, no, my glasses are broken.
And of course, there's the Futurama bit.
As per your request, please find enclosed the last man on Earth. Finally, solitude. I can read books for all eternity. It's not fair. It's not fair. Wait, my eyes aren't that bad. I can still read the large print books. It's not fair. Well, lucky I know how to read Braille. Oh! Hey, look at that weird mirror.
And the Family Guy bit.
The lesson here is that abusing alcohol has absolutely no negative consequences. You have your trophy, and my brain cells are just fine.
Hello? Where is everybody? I'm the only brain cell left. Well, at least I have my books. No, that's not fair. That's not fair. There was time now. Oh, it's not fair. Oh.
And the Jimmy Neutron bit rounding out our animated quartet.
November, December, the next year, and the next year after that, an endless supply of pie. Boysenberry, the most delicious part of my post-apocalyptic nightmare. Oh, it's not fair. I had time. I finally had all the time in the world.
Man, cartoons love Time Enough at Last. Now, all of those are riffing on the iconic ending, but the TV series Revolution did something a bit more original.
Hey, Jim.
Sorry, you must have me mistaken with someone else.
That's weird, because you look really familiar to me, Mr.
Bemis. Henry Bemis.
And you work here, Mr. Bemis? You're a librarian?
That's right.
Okay, I saved this one for last because it's got a bit of a backstory attached to it. Remember the 80s movie Weird Science? Of course you do. But do you remember that it spawned a TV series that ran for 5 years on the USA Network? Same premise. Gary and Wyatt, two high school nerds, accidentally create a hot female genie who gets them into all sorts of trouble. In an episode called Sci-Fi Zoned, we learn that the boys are huge fans of a TV show called The Sci-Fi Zone, a very thinly veiled knockoff of The Twilight Zone. They get in a fight, so Lisa the Genie puts them inside the show so that they'll work together to get out and therefore save their friendship. So they hit multiple episodes, all of which are thinly veiled knockoffs of actual Twilight Zone episodes, including Time Enough at Last.
Where are we?
Some kind of bomb shelter. But why?
Who knows? Every other Zone episode took place in a bomb shelter.
What do we have here?
Magazines?
Not just magazines. Playboy, Penthouse, Easy Rider. Strap on your reading glasses, why? We've hit the soft porn mother load.
No! So close. I can't believe you fell for that one. First time in the Zone? Never heard of irony?
Shut up.
No eyeglasses to break here, but the only light bulb fizzling out is just as bad. I mean, all that porn, all that time, it's not fair. It's not fair at all. As far as I know, that's all the Time Enough at Last parodies, but I wouldn't be shocked at all to find out that there are even more. Did I miss one? Let me know. Time Enough at Last contains an original music score by composer Leith Stevens. Unfortunately, it's never been released, not on a soundtrack and not on an isolated music track on the DVDs and Blu-rays. This is why you're hearing sound effects mixed in with the music, because I had to use the actual episode audio to pull whatever music I could without dialogue. So yeah, what the actual hell? This is an outrage, and we the people demand answers.
Music, Professor.
Hello.
Hey, Doc. It's Craig.
Hello. Frog in your throat?
No, I'm just a little bit irritated. I'm doing the podcast. It's rolling along nicely, I think. And I start talking about the music score from Time Enough at Last by Leith Stevens. Is it Leith or Laith?
Leith.
And it's not available anywhere. It's never been on a soundtrack. It's not isolated on the DVDs or the Blu-rays. As far as I know, there's no bootleg floating around. So it drives me crazy because I collect Twilight Zone music, and I use Twilight Zone music for this podcast. And what I've been doing this week is I'm using actual episode audio, so it's all got sound effects and stuff mixed in, and it's driving me crazy. So why, Doc? Why? Why is this music not available?
The short answer beats the heck out of me. I wish I had
That is a short answer.
I don't quite know why. I don't know if it has anything to do with Stevens' estate. I don't know if it has to do with the original print of the episode. I really wish I had answers for you. I'm stumped.
So what would the long answer have been?
Not much longer than that.
Oh, okay. Got it. It's frustrating.
Yeah.
It's funny because last week I did the Monsters Who Do on Maple Street, and that music is available as an isolated track on the DVDs and the Blu-rays. But it's interesting because none of that score was ever used again.
No.
And I found that weird because it's not... I mean, it could be something with this one, with Leith Stevens' Time Enough at Last. It could be, maybe there's something with the estate, or maybe it's some kind of licensing weirdness. I don't know. But this one was composed, Monsters Who Do on Maple Street was composed by Renee Garriguenc, I think,
yes.
Right? So, and he was connected to the Twilight Zone, right? Or was he? Because okay. Here's where I just drift off.
Kind of, sort of, not really.
Oh, okay.
So I mean, here's the thing about the way the music works. So within the networks, and I'm going to say networks, but also I mean some production companies. Everybody kept their own library. Okay. So ABC had one, NBC had one, CBS had one. And production companies, you have like Daystar, which did obviously Stoneberg and Outer Limits, kept a library. I'm not quite sure of the nitty-gritty of what happened with Daystar. I do know with the networks, specifically with CBS, and I'm assuming with NBC and ABC as well. Anytime a new score was composed, the composer would actually have to sign a contract saying that they can record their music any which way possible with different variations and use them wherever they want to use them without having to give royalties. Which is why Fred Steiner eventually tried to sue CBS when the Twilight Zone came out on VHS to try and get royalties, and then they pulled back that contract and said, no, you had signed it. So all of that music for the Monsters We Do on Maple Street was in the library. But I don't quite know, because the reason why some of these episodes had the music reused was because of budgets. It was cheaper to reuse an episode's music or various music cues that were in the library than to commission a new composition. So if you were to look at for instance, the CBS Easy Cue library, spelled E-Z, they actually have everything listed by mood or kind of So if they were looking for something suspenseful or looking for something like outer spacey or something like that, they would go through and they would find the pages. They also had card catalogs, these networks. I don't know what happened to the card catalogs that CBS had. There were more than one. Those are gone with the wind. So for some reason, I don't know if those cues were put in a category that didn't get much use and therefore it was just never reused, or what happened.
Okay. Most of the music for the Time Enough at Last is real, like, it's kind of brassy, there's like a lot of horns.
Yes.
It's got kind of a real city kind of a feel. Almost in parts, it's almost kind of sort of like a detective procedural film noir kind of thing.
Right.
Just the sound of it. And it's not really one of my favorite scores anyway. Because I always think it would be such a fun thing if I could somehow get certain episodes with no music, just dialogue sound effects. And I could just score it myself with stuff from the library. Sometimes I feel like, and this is extremely arrogant of me to say this, I feel like I could maybe have done a better job with certain ones.
I'll tell you. Most of the time. No, go ahead.
Most of the time, they're wonderfully done. A couple of the episodes that I've been looking at lately are People Are Alike All Over and Third from the Sun. And those both use library scores, and they actually both use very similar. They use kind of the same library cues.
Right.
For a lot of them, but they work really, really well. I mean, so those not so much, but something like this, I would just love to get a chance just to score this myself with library cues.
It's funny. You should actually try it. So one of the places that I teach, occasionally I teach a seminar for juniors called Music Since 1900, and we sort of get to design it by modules. And so I do a unit on music in film, TV, and radio. And I have the Easy Cue library, all of those cues on flash drives. And so I actually talk to my students about the way the music libraries work, and then I give them some really short video clips that have no music to them of different calibers, and I give them the actual hard copy of the catalog. And I give them the flash drives, and I put them in groups of 6 and give them about a half hour to 40 minutes to make their own score.
That's cool. Oh my god.
They love it because they all have this same 2-minute video clip. And the things that they come up with to try and score it are just absolutely incredible. Like using the CBS library.
That is awesome. Oh my god.
It's a lot of fun. I highly recommend it.
Well, if I ever live where you are, I will take your class. So we have this score, not available anywhere. Leith Stevens, I know he did some like sci-fi stuff, like films in the 50s.
He did War of the Worlds.
Right, War of the Worlds, yes.
And he actually borrowed a motive from War of the Worlds to put in Time Enough at Last.
Really?
Mm-hmm. So,
wow.
In the film, where Dr. Foster and Sylvia are trying to find shelter during this Martian raid, and they go into this farmhouse, and the house gets zapped by these ray guns. There's a motive, which we call a quarter motive. Really, it's kind of like stacked force. That is actually played, or something very similar is played when Henry Bemis comes out of the vault and starts walking through the rubble.
Oh, wow. Wow. I'm just looking at the Wikipedia page. He also did the score for a film called The Atomic City in 1952. Yes. So that's interesting. So I gotta be honest. The music is not really why I called you. because you know, I mean, I don't know that there's a lot about the Time Enough at Last score that's that fascinating. Mm-hmm. But one thing that I've been kind of looking at the last few weeks as I've been working on the podcast is because I did the Monsters I Do on Maple Street, The Shelter. Now we're hitting Time Enough at Last. So they're all episodes dealing with some aspect of nuclear war.
Right.
And I understand that you're working on a book that may have some connection to that.
I am. So my latest project is on TV from 1950 to 1969 that deals with the atomic bomb, and I'm using atomic bomb very broadly to mean any sort of nuclear weapons, so cobalt bombs, H-bombs, things like that, and the way the music works in these episodes. The cool, fun thing is that I'm slowly going through all of the series that ever aired, which is wonderful. And by going through, I mean sort of searching things and sort of seeing what I was finding. And as of today, I have found 95 TV episodes from 1950 to 1969 that deal with the atomic bomb. I'm talking about, like, excerpts from The Ed Sullivan Show, episodes of The Green Hornet, even an episode of Gilligan's Island.
I think I remember that episode.
Forward March.
Is that the one where is that the one where they find like an undetonated bomb somewhere, like in the lagoon? Okay, yeah. I remember that. Oh my God. I haven't seen Gilligan's Island since I was a kid, but I somehow remembered that.
Yeah, there's even an episode of The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, which has like the best title ever. It's called Eat, Drink, and Be Merry for Tomorrow, Kaboom. I'm having way too much fun with this project. You should probably know that.
It's nice that you're having fun with subject matter that's so grim. And it's funny, and it's interesting that you're finding these examples in comedy shows.
Right.
Because when we see it addressed on something like The Twilight Zone, it's a very serious thing. It's, you know, it's this dark, disturbing subject. And I guess, and this is a question you can probably answer. So when you're looking at this time period, 1950 to 1969, does it start off like the references you find are very serious, and then as you go later and later, there's more and more comedy, just because people maybe were getting more used to the idea? So, you know, like anything else, we acclimate to things, and then we can joke about things. Or was it funny from the beginning?
There really isn't that much comedy. Out of these 95, I found maybe like 5 episodes
Oh, okay.
The latest one that I found was actually from, I think it was is Gilligan's Island? No, Gilligan's Island was the latest one. Before that, there was an episode of Jackie Gleason and His American Scene magazine from 1962. It was actually the first episode that aired. And you can find it on YouTube. It's fantastic. Right toward the end, it's right around the 35-minute mark, he revives the Honeymooners as a skit. Art Carney is in it, but the two ladies that play Trixie and brain fart.
Oh my
Alice.
God! Come on, Alice.
Are replaced by two different actresses, but basically the gist of it is they're supposed to go on vacation to Atlantic City, and Ralph says, "No, we're not. We're going to go and practice civil defense drills in the basement for the week." And so Trixie and Alice get upset and say, "Forget you, Ralph. We're going on our own." And Norton's trying to convince him to go, and he's just like, "Fine, you go with the lady." He's like, "No, I'll be a pal and I'll stay with you." And so he and Norton go down to the basement in the building, and they're on bunk beds, and they're trying to prepare for the atomic bomb.
Oh my!
It's fantastic. It's about a 15-minute skit, but it's really, really funny. And so this is the kind of thing that we're dealing with with really. Oh, there's an episode of Red Skelton, which. So some of these episodes are actually lost, and part of it has to do with, the method of recording, which often had to do with kinescopes.
Oh, right.
When kinescopes were made, then we're pretty much done. So I mean, you get these isolated incidents where, these isolated plot devices, for instance, in The Monkees. There's an episode, The Chaperone, in 1966, where one of the monkeys is trying to gain access to this house to get in to see this girl, and for about 30 seconds, they pretend to be Fallout shelter inspectors.
Oh.
They're used sometimes as plot devices that really aren't centering. But it really also depends on the actual show. So, for instance, the early anthology shows like Goodyear Playhouse and Playhouse 90 were much, much more grim than, say, one of these war shows. Like there's one Sea Hunt where they're looking for an atomic bomb before it detonates under the water. Or you get even Ed Sullivan, which is also another thing you can look up. It's called A Short Vision. It aired twice on the Ed Sullivan Show. It was actually created by the British Film Institute, so it really is not technically American. I'm focusing on American because if I focused on worldwide, I would have a 3,000-page book and my publisher would kill me. But it was kind of an animated thing where this is what would happen if the atomic bomb got detonated while you were asleep. And Ed Sullivan forgot to warn parents the first time around that you should send your kids out of the room, and so kids wound up having nightmares. So the second time when he re-aired it, because he felt it was really important to re-air it, he basically said, parents, make sure your children are not in the room.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've stumbled across this in this research, but there's actually something Rod Serling wrote pre-Twilight Zone, an episode of Suspense in 1953, maybe 53, 52, 53, Nightmare at Ground Zero.
He also wrote another one, which was for Lux Video Theater, called Mr. Finchley versus the Bomb.
Oh, yeah. I've never seen it, but...
Well, because it's gone. The script is at Ithaca College. When I was at Ithaca, I got there early, and luckily the archivist, who was absolutely wonderful, let me sit down and read the script. I know the gist of it, but there was no kinescope made of it. So sadly, there's nothing. But yes, Nightmare at Ground Zero. Not to be confused with the Playhouse 90 Nightmare at Ground Zero, which is also... That was actually... I was at the Paley Center earlier this week, and I was watching that episode because that only exists at UCLA and it exists at the Paley Center. So that is where scientists actually they detonate a test bomb and they don't realize how powerful it is, and they make a lot of mistakes. And it deals with also, for those of you who know a bit about Cold War history, the Lucky Dragon ship, which was not so lucky. The gist of it is when they detonated a test bomb, which they did a lot in the Pacific, a fishing vessel from Japan called the Lucky Dragon was nearby, and they didn't calculate the distance and know that they were there. And so most, if not all, of the men wound up dying eventually from radiation poisoning.
Oh my God.
So the Lucky Dragon wasn't so lucky.
But that Nightmare at Ground Zero is not a Serling script, right?
That one's not. Okay. But the suspense one is.
Yes. And that's actually, listeners, if you have the Twilight Zone Season 2 Blu-ray set, it's on there. It's also on YouTube. It's easy to find. It's good. It's kind of weird. And because it's a whole mannequin angle, and I'm kind of regretting now not talking about it when I covered the After Hours, because, that's like, here's another Serling mannequin story.
Here's the thing about the mannequins. I don't know how much you know about the nuclear testing program that the United States had. So once we moved the testing from the Pacific to the Las Vegas area, because it was cheaper and it was much more convenient, the U.S. decided what they were going to try and do is they were going to try and see how the atomic bomb would affect your average American home. And by average American home, we mean everything from furnishings to appliances to people. And of course, since we couldn't detonate an atomic bomb with people inside, the next best thing was to take mannequins. So JCPenney donated a whole slew of mannequins and clothes. And there is a 2-page layout that JCPenney actually put in a magazine after the test detonation. I think it was the Apple II test, where they showed you the mannequin before and the mannequin after. Some of the mannequins they actually took back after the test if they didn't have a lot of radiation to them, and they sort of paraded them around the country to show. But they even had cars and everything. So they put mannequins everywhere. And so I was reading a really wonderful book in my massive amount of research that just came out a few weeks ago. It is behind me. Where is it? It is... No, I can't find it. But basically, it talks about her experience growing up with this rhetoric. And she said as a child, she was afraid of mannequins because she equated mannequins with nuclear annihilation.
Wow, that is interesting. And that's not the usual reason people would be afraid of a mannequin.
No. And so one of the chapters in my book is about nuclear testing. Because more episodes than you might think of television dealt with the testing program. So you have Nightmare at Ground Zero, both the Playhouse 90 and the suspense version. You have an episode of 77 Sunset Strip. You have The New People, which do you know anything about The New People?
Not really.
You should. It's actually a Serling thing.
Oh, that, okay, yes. Okay,
or John Phillips, as he signed his name to it.
But they, like a group of people, are they like on an island or something?
Yeah, they're marooned on an island that was abandoned, but originally for test purposes, and they realize that they're there when they see the mannequins.
And they kind of build their own society?
Right.
Kind of. Okay, yeah, I do. I've heard a bit about that.
So
so I'm sitting here.
There's a lot about the nuclear testing program, and most, if not all, deal with mannequins. And so it's funny because actually I gave a paper on this. The music for a lot of these episodes, which is actually really cool, if you go back and you look at the nuclear testing documentaries that the government put together, they actually had people write music for it. The music was most often performed by the U.S. Air Force Band, oddly enough. And if you go back and listen to and watch some of these documentaries, especially when they detonate the bombs, the music is very similar to the kind of music you find in these TV episodes, specifically like Nightmare at Ground Zero. There's one moment in I believe it's the Operation Ivy film, where you've got this Hammond organ and in these weird tone clusters playing. And when you go to Nightmare at Ground Zero, the same exact kind of music is playing. And unfortunately, I cannot track down the scores for these government films. These government films mainly were put together and recorded by a place called Lookout Mountain Laboratory, or LML, which was disbanded, but it was considered a top secret military operation. And so finding records that are covered by the Freedom of Information Act that actually would allow me to find these things has been rough. I've even tried contacting the archivist of the United States Air Force Band to see if they have the scores, because they have they said something like over 100,000 scores or something like that of everything they've ever played, and I never got a response.
Oh, that's too bad. So I Googled this JCPenney thing. So I'm looking at a before and after picture.
Isn't it creepy?
So here's a female mannequin, and the text under the picture is blue and yellow cotton basket weave dress, red leather casuals. And then the after, it's kind of ripped apart, and it's dress shows burns on left side, mannequin neck cracked on left side, right cheek cracked, body torn off at waist. Oh my God. Oh shit.
And some of
that is fascinating.
Some of these, and if actually, I think you could sort of see the whole layout somewhere, but if you read some of the accounts, like people were talking about how like their heads were pockmarked but otherwise untouched. But here's the other thing, and I get so into mannequins, it's not funny.
Whoa.
As long as that sounds.
All right.
They try to make everything, as I said, be like the average American home. And so at one point they said, we need to make these mannequins represent the average American human. So they filled their bodies with sand to make them weigh the proper weight of a person during that era.
Well, that would give you a more accurate result, I guess.
And for the children, they put the sand in their feet, because that's where supposedly children's body weight is concentrated.
Is that true?
There's a lot of things from the nuclear testing program that I found were not true, so it wouldn't surprise me if it wasn't.
That just doesn't sound right. But I've had kids. I never weighed their feet. I don't know. I mean, I have big feet, but I don't think that's where my weight is.
And I think, if I remember correctly, they said something along the lines of the average American male. Let me see if I can pull this up, if I can find it. Something like 120 pounds and 5'7".
What? Was that the average American male in the 50s?
According to what the government felt.
So could it be that because of all of this testing and the gradual spreading of radiation throughout the country, American males, 50, 60 years later, are now more like 6 feet, 200 pounds.
Maybe the sci-fi films like them were onto something.
Maybe. Am I going to become a giant ant? I don't know. It could happen. It could. I'm just imagining this whole like existential crisis thing of me like waking up and I'm a giant cockroach and like how my family reacts to it.
Like Kafka. Kafka.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
What I have to say is probably the most fun / depressing about my research is that I've gone through a lot of the old pamphlets and books and things like that. And a lot of these you can find online. Like you can Google like atomic bomb pamphlets or whatever and find PDFs for free, and it's wonderful. But some of them, the images that they have, like they have cartoon images that go with this guidebook. And so there's one where they tell you that if you are outside during a detonation, you should, before you go inside, strip naked and bury your clothes. And there's one where this guy is like covering his midsection, like in shame, while his clothes are in the pile on the floor outside next to a hole. Like, There's also one that's really hilarious. They have the same booklet where they have they address the issue of sterility and whether or not you will be sterile if you are in an atomic attack. And there's a really stupid little poem that goes with it. It's got like a drawing of a sailor with like 6 babies in his hands. And it's like, you don't have to worry about sterility. The best will be left. Ability. And I'm like, oh my God.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Oh, wah, wah, wah.
Right. Or, go outside and if you're stuck in an atomic attack, don't fear. Like, cover your head with a newspaper. Like, that'll do anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw that in one of the Duck and Cover videos that I was watching when I was getting ready to do this podcast, and that was hilarious. It's like, really? And what newspaper are they using?
Right.
Like,
I watched some of these with my mom, and because she had never seen them, but she had lived through the era of Duck and Cover, and she's just like, I can't believe that they actually thought that this was a good idea.
Right. And it's funny, and I think we can probably say this of any period ever in history, is like, what were they thinking? I mean, this is crazy. I mean, going back to like the earth is flat kind of stuff, it's just dumb, but the thought that you can detonate something that powerful and all you have to do is like crawl under a desk and you'll be fine. I mean, it's crazy. And Hiroshima should have been the lesson there. It's like, no, that isn't how this works.
Right.
You blow something like that up and it's horrific carnage that just goes on and on. There's no protection from it, but yet people survived that, obviously. I was watching this really chilling documentary, and I wish I could remember what it was now. It's been about a year or two ago that I watched this. It was on Netflix, and it was just about the Hiroshima bombing. It was so interesting to me because they had survivors telling their stories, about like there was this one young woman who was like a teacher's aide, and she survived the blast. And then she's talking about how, she went out. The building she was in wasn't completely leveled. She went out and she's looking around and she's seeing other people coming out. And it's just odd to me because people were right there and they lived through it. And that's what's amazing to me, because I think that the images that we typically see of these things are like that barn getting blown, flattened by the shockwave.
Right.
We think of it as anything in that blast radius is gone. And that's not really how it actually works. Right. I mean, there are structures left intact. There are people still alive. It's I mean, there's a likelihood that they're going to, have severe radiation burns, but it's funny to me that these things don't quite make light of it, but they, like with this newspaper thing, but it's just such a boneheaded thing to tell somebody like that'll save you.
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, speaking of Hiroshima, there is actually a few, not very many, TV shows that deal with it. One is actually an episode of Dr. Kildare called One Clear Bright Thursday Morning, where one of the doctors he's working with finds out his wife is pregnant, and then finds out that she has cancer because she was a survivor, I believe, in Nagasaki.
Wow.
So you get those really depressing moments, and sort of she spends the entire episode like basically telling her husband, like, I don't care what happens to me, but make sure you save the baby. Like, keep me alive so I can give birth to this baby and then I'll die. It's really, really horribly depressing. But the other thing is, like, for instance, to get back to the Twilight Zone, episodes like The Old Man in the Cave, if you look at some of these pamphlets, it actually will tell you that canned food, if it had gone through radiation, is still perfectly safe to eat as long as you wipe it off. That is not as ridiculous, however, as people actually writing in these pamphlets that it is perfectly safe to eat a banana as long as you peel it.
Oh my God.
Or wash your apple and take the skin off, and you can eat it even though it may have radioactive dust on it.
Oh my God. Wow. Of course, we're also talking about the same period of time when everybody smoked cigarettes.
Absolutely.
And apparently nobody thought that would be a problem. So, but it's just, it's shocking. And it's it's one of those things where, if you start like prowling YouTube for these kinds of videos, you see a lot of really hilarious things. Hilarious but horrible, but you're still like nervously laughing because it's like, how could people have been that stupid? And it makes me wonder, in like 20, 30 years, like, what things should we have known that we don't know? Like, Diet Pepsi will kill you. We didn't know that.
If you have not seen The Atomic Cafe, I highly recommend that you watch it. It was released in the 80s. It's kind of a documentary. It's got all of these. It's comprised of all of these different kinds of sort of mini documentaries and primary source clips and things like that, spliced into one to kind of give you this narrative. And so it has scenes from Duck and Cover in it, and it has people talking about the gun thy neighbor debate, which I'm trying to remember if you actually talked about last week in terms of the shelter, but it was actually called Gun Thy Neighbor. It was this world debate as to, if you are the only one in your shelter, in your block with a shelter, and your neighbors want to come in, do you let them in or do you shoot them? And you can look through newspapers of this period and have like all of these different things, and part of it was started by, I think it was an article in Newsweek or Time, something like that, where a priest was basically talking about the morality debate of the shelter. And there are all of these different things, like people were deciding whether or not which is more important for their shelter, food or guns. America! There's even a show that went until about the 80s called Insight. It was run by the Paulist Fathers, which was a Jesuit Catholic organization. And every week they had different episodes that dealt with morality. And they even had a shelter episode about what to do. So, yeah, even religion got in. There were booklets called The Church's Role in Civil Defense and things like that. And so everybody really got in on this, especially with the gun thy neighbor thing, because people were sort of wondering, and, with Rod Serling, what do I do if we're the only ones on our street that have a shelter?
So when can we expect this new book?
So it's due to the publisher in 2018, is it? No, 2019.
Oh, wow, okay.
And so it should be coming out early 2020.
Well, if we're still on the air...
So it's funny because when I was talking with the publisher at a conference, she was saying, it's incredible how relevant this book is. And so if we go into atomic war, I can put something up on the company Facebook page and be like, hey, this book is relevant and it's new. And I'm like, I'm not quite sure that I want that to happen.
Yeah, all things being equal, I think we'd rather just not be there. But
pretty much.
Yeah. That's a long time, man.
It is. And part of it is the nature of how much stuff I have to work with. When I got the book contract in March, I only had something like 65 episodes. So between March and now, I found another 30 and change. And I'm inclined to say that with 95, there's probably more.
Oh, sure. And that's just stopping at 69.
That's 50 to 69.
Yeah. Obviously, this was still a thing beyond 1969. I was born in 69.
So the last chapter, I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens in the 70s. And so there are a few... I'm just sort of taking piecemeal, little bits of an episode here and there to sort of show what's happening in the 70s, but there's an episode of Hawaii Five-0. There is an episode of Saturday Night Live that has a skit that makes fun of I Love Lucy, where she and Ethel are in the chocolate factory trying to, with the bonbons. Only in the SNL skit, it's A-bombs. It's actually, you can Google it. It's called Lucy A-bomb. And the SNL website actually has it. There's also an episode of Barney Miller, where a college student is building an atomic bomb, and it's in his apartment, and the guys with Barney Miller don't realize how hazardous this thing is.
Mm-hmm.
When you get to the 80s, there's even an episode of Benson. And back to the 70s, there's an episode of Happy Days, Be the First on Your Block, about building fallout shelters.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I promised my publisher I'd only be about 90,000 words. How I will keep to this, I do not know, given the material that I'm working with.
Right. So right now, you're still just research. You're just in the research phase.
Kind of. I have several chapters drafted. So, shameless plug, listeners. For those of you who are in around New York, on September 28th, I'll be giving a talk that's actually based on one of my book chapters at New York University, their Center for Cold War Studies and the Tamiment Library. They have a Cold War seminar series every semester. Oh, wow. And so I'll be giving a talk from about 4 to 5:30 about shelter anxiety and civil defense on television. And so the way it works is that I distribute the paper, in this case, part of my book chapter, and you read it about a week in advance, and then you come in, I give 10 to 15 minute talk, and then there's a conversation among everybody about the chapter and things like that. Wow. So if you're around, I would love to have you, and you sort of get an idea of what I'm doing. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the shelter, and also one more pallbearer. Which also deals with a bomb shelter, but in a different aspect. I'll also be talking about an episode of Route 66, and I'll be alluding probably to the Insight episode. I may or may not also be dealing with the show I Led 3 Lives, which has 3 episodes that deal with the atomic bomb or civil defense. So there's a lot of stuff, and so I've got some chapters written, and as I thought my testing chapter was complete, and then I found an episode of Goodyear Playhouse that I actually wound up watching at the Paley Center last weekend. So there's just it just keeps piling up. There's more and more stuff to work with. So I'm kind of researching still, but I'm also doing a lot of writing, or at least trying to.
And you said that was at NYU?
It's at NYU, yeah. I believe they'll probably put something up in a couple of weeks with an email address to RSVP, because they have a lovely little reception after it. But once you RSVP, about a week before, they'll send everybody the paper to read, and then you can just...
I was just kind of trying to find a link I could put in the show notes, but I don't think they have it on their website yet.
I will give you the link to the Tamiment Center, and hopefully at some point that will go up. I think they're only up to... I'm
looking at it right now. September 15th.
Yeah, I was originally supposed to be on the 21st, and then the respondent we were going to have couldn't make it, so we bumped it to the 28th, and then she couldn't make that either, so we just got another respondent.
The link is still good, though, because it'll be the same link. It'll just
and that email address at the bottom, I believe it's where you just RSVP to.
So, can't really plug the book yet because the book doesn't exist yet, but it's on the distant horizon. It sounds really fascinating, and I will, of course, definitely be picking up a copy of that. And if we're still on the air somehow magically in 2020 or whatever you said that would be, we'll have you on then to plug it then too. Boy, that's 3 years from now. I don't even know what I'll be doing in 3 years, but I probably won't be alive in 3 years. But
who knows if any of us will?
Right. Well, anyway, Doc, as always, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
It's always a blast to talk to you, and I will talk to you soon.
Sorry.
I'll talk to you later.
Bye.
All right, bye. God. Last week, when I was talking about the 80s Twilight Zone episode Shelter Skelter, I figured it was network television's last dramatic depiction of a bomb shelter. And true to form, I was totally wrong.
Shame! Shame! Shame!
As Doc so kindly pointed out to me on Facebook, NBC's Quantum Leap went there a full 4 years later.
Fear arising that one could time travel within his own lifetime, Dr. Sam Beckett stepped into the Quantum Leap accelerator.
Come on, man! Duck and cover! Get down! And put your mask on!
Why?
The Ruskies just lobbed a bomb on New York City!
What?
It's World War III!
Yeah, what now? Come on now!
Man, I loved Quantum Leap. And yes, I'm still pissed that they ended it so horribly and unresolvedly. I mean, it's been, almost 25 years ago now. I'm kind of surprised they haven't done some kind of sci-fi original movie or like an event revival series kind of thing to wrap it all up. You know, Scott Bakula and Dean Stockwell aren't getting any younger. Anyway, the episode of interest to us at the moment is Nuclear Family, which aired May 15th, 1991.
Al, I'm an atom bomb shelter salesman.
Well, actually, you're a junior at Oklahoma State. Yeah. Apparently, you lost your basketball scholarship when you wrecked your knee.
Yeah, Max said something about I'm here selling bomb shelters to make money to finish school.
Well, you know, that's a good business to go into. This October 26, 1962 is right at the height.
Cuban Missile Crisis, I know.
That's right.
I know, yeah, look at this place. You got gas masks. Look at this thing. It's a radiation chart. And they got atomic rumpus rooms, but there's no nuclear war.
Yeah, but people didn't know that then. We all thought maybe it was the end of the world.
We?
Well, see, you're Swiss cheese, or you're too young to remember what the Cuban Missile Crisis really was like. And Sam, I gotta tell you, you don't realize how close we came to World War III. I mean, total annihilation.
But Kennedy doesn't attack Cuba, and Khrushchev removes all the missiles, right?
That's right. But another kind of bomb goes off in this backyard. You see that gun?
Someone in the family gets shot?
No, the neighbor, Bert Rosecrans. Ziggy says there's a 99% chance that you're here to keep him from getting blown away.
How does it happen?
Well, Ziggy's still trying to get into the court transcripts, but an old newspaper article said that Mac shot Bert when Bert tried to break into this shelter tomorrow night.
No.
Mac gets 20 years, Kate and the kids lose the business, the house, the cars, and worst of all, Mac.
It still doesn't make any sense. I mean, why would somebody go and shoot their neighbor?
It was the Cuban Missile Crisis.
What does that have to do with anything?
Sam, you don't remember, but people then, normal people, ordinarily normal people, stocked their shelters with weapons. They even said they would shoot their friends to protect their family.
That's insane.
Well, what's going to happen here tomorrow night is insane.
Unless I can stop Mac, I know. I'll do it. Somehow.
Man, that all sounds like an alternate universe version of The Shelter if Doc Stockton had maybe unloaded that revolver into Marty or Jerry or Frank or one of their wives or one of their kids. The Shelter would have aired a little over a year before the events of this episode, but wouldn't it have been kind of cool if they'd shown one of the characters watching TV and The Shelter just happened to be on? But of course, that wouldn't have been accurate since the Twilight Zone wasn't syndicated until after the fifth and final season ended in 1964, plus none of the third season episodes, including The Shelter, were shown in summer reruns in 1962. Plus, they wouldn't be showing reruns in October anyway. And actually, the Twilight Zone wasn't on the air at all in the fall of 1962. Season 4 didn't start until January 1963. But I suppose Quantum Leap, by its very nature, is dealing in alternate timelines, since Sam changes history in every episode, so maybe they could have gotten away with it. But no, nobody's watching the Twilight Zone here, but we do get a great scene of a couple of kids singing along with a vintage duck and cover commercial, which is almost as good.
He's duck and cover, duck and cover.
He did what
We all must learn to do. You and you and you and you.
Duck and cover.
Sundays, holidays, vacation time. We must be ready every day, all the time, to do the right thing if the atomic bomb explodes. Duck and cover.
All 5 seasons of Quantum Leap came out on Blu-ray recently, and I'm not gonna lie, I am tempted, but I've got too many other Blu-rays that are higher priority. Sorry, Scott Bakula. You know what I just realized? Both the Drew Carey Show and Weird Science episodes with bomb shelters aired after the Quantum Leap episode. But those were comedies, and the Weird Science one existed solely for the Time Enough at Last joke. But that Drew Carey bomb shelter episode aired in 1999. But it was more Y2K related than nuclear attack related. So I'm going to stick with Quantum Leap being the last major network television show to dramatically depict a bomb shelter. If I'm wrong, let me know. So, Time Enough at Last. Not exactly a favorite of mine. I don't hate it as much nowadays, but I can't say I really love it either. But who cares what I think? I cannot deny that this episode is an absolute juggernaut. It's been parodied more times than any other episode. Nightmare at 20,000 Feet might come close. It's been merchandised to hell, and whether you like it, love it, hate it, or feel nothing for it, it's a true Twilight Zone icon. Now, if it's one of your all-time favorites, and you're a bit miffed that I don't share your undying passion for it, well, let me know. We're on Facebook and Tumblr. Just search for @ZonePod and you'll find us. Or if you want to engage in a direct dialogue with yours truly, drop us an email at zonepod@gmail.com. If you want to launch a nuclear missile at my house to protest my less than glowing opinion of the episode, aim it at... Come on. Did you really think I was going to give out my address? Next time on the podcast. I'm actually not sure at this point. We're taking another break from the usual episode synopsis format. Yeah, I know, but remember, variety is the spice of life, as they say. I'm honestly not 100% sure what our next installment will look like yet, but I've got a few fish in the percolator, so stay tuned. And kids, if out of nowhere you hear the telltale blare of air raid sirens, you better make damn sure you duck and cover. But above all, play nice.
Between light and shadow.
We interrupt our normal program to cooperate in security and civil defense measures as requested by the United States government. This is a Conelrad radio alert. Normal broadcasting will now be discontinued for an indefinite period. Civil defense information will be broadcast in most areas at 640 and 1240 on your regular radio receiver. All residents in and around Erie County will receive official Erie County Civil Defense bulletins on 640 kilocycles on your radio receiver, while the residents in and around Niagara County should tune to 1240 kilocycles. I repeat, normal broadcasting will be discontinued for an indefinite period. Civil defense information will be broadcast in most areas at 640 and 1240 on your regular radio receiver.